Adolf Hitler is one of the most well-known and controversial figures in world history. His life and actions had a deep and lasting impact on Europe and the rest of the world during the 20th century. He was the leader of Nazi Germany and played a central role in the events that led to World War II and the Holocaust. Learning about Adolf Hitler is not about admiration or praise. Instead, it is about understanding history. By studying his life, we can learn how economic problems, political instability, propaganda, and extremist ideas can lead to terrible consequences when power is misused. This biography presents a factual and educational overview of Adolf Hitler's life, beginning with his birth and ending with his death. It is written to help English learners improve reading and listening skills while gaining historical knowledge. Adolf Hitler was born on April 20th, 1889, in the town of Braunau am Inn, located in Austria-Hungary. This town sat near the border between Austria and Germany, a detail that later became important in Hitler's sense of identity. His father, Alois Hitler, was a government customs official. Alois was strict, controlling, and often angry. He wanted his son to become a civil servant like himself. His mother, Clara Hitler, was gentle and loving. Adolf was very close to her and depended on her emotionally. Hitler was the fourth of 6 children, but most of his siblings died young. This left Adolf feeling isolated. The strict discipline from his father and the emotional protection from his mother shaped his personality in complex ways. As a child, Hitler was intelligent but stubborn. He did well in primary school, but his performance declined in secondary school. He often argued with teachers and resisted authority. He preferred daydreaming, reading, and drawing rather than following rules. Hitler wanted to become an artist. He enjoyed painting and drawing buildings and landscapes. However, his father strongly opposed this dream and pushed him toward a practical career. This conflict created tension between them. When Hitler's father died in 1903, Adolf felt relief but also uncertainty. Afterward, his school performance continued to decline, and he eventually dropped out without completing formal education. In 1907, Hitler's mother died from cancer. This was a devastating loss for him. After her death, Hitler moved to Vienna, hoping to study art professionally. He applied to the Academy of Fine Arts Vienna, but was rejected twice. The school said he lacked talent in drawing people, although his architectural drawings were strong. These rejections deeply affected him and damaged his confidence. Hitler lived in poverty for several years. He stayed in homeless shelters and survived by selling small paintings. During this time, he became bitter and resentful. Vienna was a city with many political movements, and Hitler was exposed to nationalist, anti-Semitic, and extremist ideas, which later became central to his beliefs. In 1913, Adolf Hitler left Austria and moved to Munich, Germany. At this time, he was a young man with no stable job, no formal education, and no clear future. Although he was born in Austria, Hitler strongly believed that he was culturally and emotionally German. He admired German history, language, and military power, and he disliked the multi-ethnic nature of Austria-Hungary. One important reason for his move was to avoid military service in the Austrian army, which he did not respect. He preferred Germany and hoped to build a new life there. However, his situation did not improve immediately. He continued to live a lonely and uncertain life, earning little money and spending much of his time reading newspapers, political writings, and nationalist literature. In August 1914, World War I began. The war started after rising tensions between European powers and soon many countries were involved. When Germany declared war, Hitler felt excited and hopeful. For him, the war represented purpose, unity, and national pride. Hitler volunteered for the German army almost immediately. Even though he was still legally Austrian, he was accepted into a Bavarian regiment. This moment was very important in his life. For the first time, he felt accepted as part of something larger than himself. Hitler served as a messenger, a dangerous role that required him to carry messages between units on the battlefield. He lived in trenches, surrounded by mud, rats, explosions, and constant fear. He witnessed the deaths of fellow soldiers and experienced extreme physical and emotional stress. Despite the danger, Hitler took his duties seriously. He followed orders closely and showed discipline. He was wounded twice, once by a shell explosion and later by a gas attack that temporarily blinded him. He received military medals, including the Iron Cross, for bravery. However, Hitler did not form close friendships with other soldiers. Many saw him as quiet, intense, and socially distant. He spent much of his free time reading or talking about politics and Germany's future. World War I had a deep and lasting impact on Hitler's personality and beliefs. The military structure gave him a sense of order and purpose that he had never experienced before. He believed strongly in obedience, hierarchy, and discipline, ideas that later shaped his leadership style. When Germany began to struggle toward the end of the war, Hitler became increasingly angry and frustrated. In November 1918, Germany surrendered. Hitler was in a hospital recovering from a gas attack when he heard the news. The defeat shocked him deeply. He refused to accept that Germany had lost fairly. Instead, he believed the army had been betrayed by politicians, civilians, and minority groups. This belief later became known as the stab in the back myth, which claimed that Germany was weakened from within rather than defeated on the battlefield. Germany's surrender destroyed the sense of meaning Hitler had found in the war. He felt humiliated, angry, and lost. The collapse of the German Empire and the creation of a democratic government made him feel that the nation had lost its strength and identity. This emotional crisis pushed Hitler toward extreme political views. He began to believe that Germany needed a strong leader, strict control, and national unity to recover. These ideas became central to his future political career. When World War I officially ended, Germany was in chaos. The economy was weak, unemployment was high, and many people felt hopeless. Hitler chose to remain in the army for a short time after the war, which provided him with food, housing, and structure. During this period, the army used him to observe political groups and report on them. This task introduced Hitler to political meetings and public speaking. It was during one of these assignments that he first encountered the political party that would change his life, the German Workers' Party. This moment marked the transition from soldier to political activist. The experiences of war, defeat, and national humiliation shaped Hitler's worldview and prepared the path for his later rise to power. Hitler's time in Germany during World War I was one of the most important phases of his life. The war gave him identity, while defeat gave him anger and purpose. Without this experience, it is unlikely that he would have entered politics or gained influence later. This section of his life shows how war and national trauma can shape individuals, sometimes leading them toward destructive paths. By the early 1920s, Adolf Hitler had become the most important figure in the Nazi Party. Germany at this time was suffering from severe problems. The economy was weak, inflation was rising, and many people were angry about the Treaty of Versailles, which punished Germany after World War I. Many Germans felt humiliated and betrayed, and Hitler used these emotions to gain support. Hitler was a powerful and emotional speaker. He blamed Germany's problems on the democratic government, Marxists, and Jewish people. His speeches attracted large crowds, especially among unemployed workers, former soldiers, and nationalists. During this period, the Nazi Party also created a paramilitary group called the SA, Stormtroopers. The SA used violence and intimidation to break up political meetings and attack opponents. In November 1923, Germany faced a national crisis. Hyperinflation had destroyed savings, and the government was losing control. Inspired by other authoritarian leaders in Europe, Hitler believed the time was ripe to take power by force. On November 8, 1923, Hitler and his supporters attempted a coup known as the Beer Hall Putsch in Munich. Hitler entered a large beer hall where Bavarian leaders were meeting and declared that a revolution had begun. He hoped to march on Berlin and overthrow the national government. However, the plan failed. The next day, Hitler and his followers marched through Munich, but they were stopped by the police. Gunfire broke out, killing several Nazis and police officers. Hitler was arrested shortly afterward, and the attempted takeover collapsed completely. Hitler was charged with treason, a serious crime. Many expected a harsh punishment. However, the trial became a turning point in his life. During the trial in 1924, Hitler used the courtroom as a stage. He gave long speeches defending his actions and attacking the government. Instead of showing regret, he presented himself as a patriotic German who only wanted to save his country. Newspapers across Germany reported on the trial, giving Hitler national attention for the first time. Some judges were sympathetic to his nationalist ideas. As a result, Hitler received a relatively light sentence, 5 years in prison, though he served less than 1 year. Hitler was sent to Landsberg prison, where conditions were comfortable compared to normal prisons. He was allowed visitors, wore his own clothes, and had time to read and write. While in prison, Hitler dictated a book to his deputy, Rudolf Hess. This book, titled Mein Kampf, My Struggle, explained Hitler's political beliefs and future plans. In the book, he expressed extreme anti-Semitism, strong German nationalism, hatred of democracy, the idea that Germany needed more territory, called Lebensraum, living space, the belief in a single, powerful leader. Although Mein Kampf did not sell well at first, it later became widely distributed once Hitler gained power. Prison was not only a time of writing, but also a time of reflection. Hitler realized that trying to seize power by force had failed. He concluded that the Nazi Party must gain control legally, through elections and political manipulation, rather than violence alone. This was a crucial change in strategy. Hitler decided to present himself as a legitimate political leader instead of a revolutionary rebel. He was released from prison in December 1924 after serving only about 9 months. When Hitler returned to public life, the Nazi Party was weak and divided. It had been temporarily banned after the failed coup. Hitler worked carefully to rebuild it. He reorganized the party with strict discipline and clear hierarchy. Loyalty to Hitler became central. He also expanded party organizations, including the Hitler Youth, aimed at influencing young people, the SS, an elite security force that later became very powerful, propaganda offices to control messaging and public image. Hitler placed great importance on propaganda, using posters, rallies, symbols, and slogans to attract supporters. By the late 1920s, Hitler was focused on gaining power through democratic systems. Even though he personally opposed democracy, he ran for office, gave speeches across Germany, and worked to make the Nazi Party appear respectable and organized. Although the party remained small at first, Hitler had laid the foundation for future success. The economic collapse of the Great Depression would soon give him the opportunity he needed. In 1925, the Nazi Party was officially re-established after being banned. Hitler took full control and reorganized it carefully. He demanded absolute loyalty and placed himself at the top of the party hierarchy. This leadership principle became known as the Führer principle, meaning that all authority flowed from one leader. Hitler focused heavily on organization and propaganda. He created regional party offices across Germany and trained speakers to spread Nazi messages. Party rallies were carefully planned events, using flags, uniforms, music, and symbols to create emotional impact. During this period, the Nazi Party remained relatively small. In national elections, it received limited support. However, Hitler was patient. He believed that the right conditions would eventually bring success. In 1929, the Great Depression began after a major financial crash in the United States. The crisis spread quickly to Germany, which depended heavily on foreign loans. Factories closed, banks failed, and millions of Germans lost their jobs. This economic disaster changed everything. Many people lost faith in democracy and mainstream political parties. Fear, anger, and desperation created an opportunity for extremist movements. Hitler promised simple solutions: jobs for the unemployed, strong leadership, national pride, an end to the Treaty of Versailles. He blamed Germany's problems on the democratic government, communists, and Jewish people. His speeches became more popular, and Nazi membership grew rapidly. In the 1930 national election, the Nazi Party made a major breakthrough, becoming the second largest party in the German parliament. This result shocked the political establishment. Hitler traveled across Germany, sometimes speaking several times a day. He used modern technology such as airplanes, radio broadcasts, posters, and newspapers to reach millions of people. His image was carefully controlled to make him appear strong, confident, and patriotic. In 1932, Hitler ran for president of Germany against the elderly president, Paul von Hindenburg. Hitler lost, but he gained millions of votes, proving that he was a major political force. By late 1932, Germany was in political chaos. No party could form a stable government. Presidents appointed chancellors who ruled by emergency decrees rather than parliament. Many conservative politicians believed they could use Hitler to gain popular support while controlling him behind the scenes. This was a serious miscalculation. On January 30th, 1933, President Hindenburg appointed Adolf Hitler as Chancellor of Germany. Although Nazis did not yet control the government fully, Hitler now held a position of real power. Once in office, Hitler moved quickly. In February 1933, a fire destroyed the German parliament building, known as the Reichstag. The Nazis blamed communists for the fire. Using this event, Hitler convinced President Hindenburg to approve the Reichstag fire decree, which suspended civil liberties such as freedom of speech, freedom of the press, and the right to fair trials. Thousands of political opponents were arrested. In March 1933, the government passed the Enabling Act, which allowed Hitler to make laws without parliamentary approval. This act effectively ended democracy in Germany. Over the next months, Hitler banned all other political parties. Trade unions were dissolved, and their leaders were arrested. The Nazi Party became the only legal political party in Germany. Government institutions, schools, courts, and the media were brought under Nazi control. Loyalty to Hitler became mandatory. Anyone who resisted faced imprisonment, exile, or death. This period shows how Adolf Hitler came to power not through a sudden revolution, but through legal and political systems that failed to protect democracy. Economic crisis, fear, propaganda, and political compromise allowed an extremist leader to gain total control. Understanding this section is essential for learning how democracies can collapse when institutions are weak and citizens lose trust in them. After Adolf Hitler had secured full control of the German government, Germany was transformed into a totalitarian state. This meant that the government controlled nearly every part of daily life. There was no freedom of opinion, no independent media, and no legal way to oppose the Nazi Party. Fear became a normal part of life for many citizens. The Nazi government believed that the individual existed only to serve the state. Loyalty to Hitler and obedience to authority were considered the highest values. People were expected to conform, and those who did not were treated as enemies. The Nazi regime used propaganda to shape how people thought. Radios, newspapers, films, posters, and school textbooks all promoted Nazi ideas. Hitler was presented as a heroic and almost perfect leader. Negative information was censored and criticism was punished. Education was redesigned to support Nazi ideology. Children were taught to obey authority, admire war, and believe in racial superiority. Teachers who refused to follow Nazi rules were fired. Universities were also controlled, and many scientists, writers, and professors were forced to leave Germany. Youth organizations played a major role. Boys were trained to become soldiers, while girls were prepared for motherhood and domestic roles. From a young age, children were encouraged to place loyalty to the state above loyalty to their families. The Nazi government relied heavily on fear to maintain control. The secret police, known as the Gestapo, monitored the population. People could be arrested without trial based on suspicion alone. Neighbors, co-workers, and even family members sometimes reported each other to authorities. Political opponents, journalists, religious leaders, and anyone considered disloyal could be sent to concentration camps. These camps were originally created to imprison and intimidate enemies of the state. Prisoners were forced to do hard labor under brutal conditions. Many died from hunger, disease, or abuse. Public punishment and violence were used to discourage resistance. As a result, most people remained silent, even if they privately disagreed with the regime. Central to Nazi rule was the belief in racial hierarchy. The Nazis claimed that Germans of so-called Aryan descent were superior, while others were considered inferior or dangerous. Jewish people were especially targeted. Step by step, their rights were taken away. They were removed from government jobs, schools, businesses, and public life. They were forced to wear identifying symbols and were publicly humiliated. Other groups were also persecuted, including Roma people, disabled individuals, Slavic populations, homosexuals, religious minorities, political dissidents. The regime used laws, violence, and propaganda to isolate these groups and remove them from society. Over time, Nazi policies became increasingly violent. Jewish families were forced into crowded ghettos, where food and medical care were limited. Many people died from starvation and disease. During World War II, Nazi leaders made the decision to carry out the systematic murder of Europe's Jewish population. This plan became known as the Holocaust. Special extermination camps were built, where victims were transported by train and killed in large numbers, often immediately upon arrival. Gas chambers, forced labor, and mass shootings were used to murder millions of people. By the end of the war, approximately 6 million Jewish people had been killed, along with millions of others. This was not the result of chaos alone, but of organized state policy carried out by officials, soldiers, and collaborators across occupied Europe. One of the most disturbing aspects of this period is that many ordinary people participated in or benefited from the system. Some followed orders out of fear, others out of belief, and some for personal gain. At the same time, a small number of individuals resisted by hiding victims, spreading information, or refusing to cooperate. Many of these people were imprisoned or killed. Their actions show that resistance was possible, but extremely dangerous. Life under Nazi rule changed how people thought and behaved. Years of propaganda, fear, and violence damaged trust between citizens. Moral responsibility was weakened as people became used to cruelty and injustice. By the time the war turned against Germany, the consequences of Nazi rule were already catastrophic, not only for the victims, but also for German society itself. By the late 1930s, Nazi Germany had become increasingly aggressive in its foreign policy. Adolf Hitler believed that Germany needed more territory and greater influence in Europe. He argued that expansion was necessary for the country's future and for correcting what he saw as past injustices. These ideas led directly to the outbreak of World War II. In September 1939, German forces entered Poland. This action caused Britain and France to declare war on Germany, officially starting World War II in Europe. At first, Germany achieved rapid military success. Using fast-moving tactics that combine ground forces and air power, German armies quickly defeated or occupied several neighboring countries. These early victories increased Hitler's confidence and strengthened his control at home. Between 1939 and 1941, Germany expanded its control across much of Europe. Countries such as Denmark, Norway, the Netherlands, Belgium, and France were defeated or occupied. Paris fell in 1940, shocking the world. However, not all countries surrendered. Britain continued to resist, and German air attacks failed to force the country into submission. This marked the first major limitation of German expansion. In 1941, Hitler made one of his most important decisions. He ordered an invasion of the Soviet Union. This opened a massive new front in the East. The conflict became larger, more complex, and far more demanding for Germany's resources. Later that same year, the war became truly global when Japan attacked Pearl Harbor, leading the United States to enter the war. Germany then declared war on the United States, bringing a powerful new opponent into the conflict. As the war continued, Germany began to face serious problems. Its enemies were stronger, better supplied, and increasingly coordinated. Several major turning points changed the course of the war. German forces were stopped and pushed back in the east. Allied forces gained control of key areas in North Africa. Strategic bombing weakened German industry and infrastructure. By 1943, it was clear that Germany was no longer winning. The war shifted from expansion to defense. Inside Germany, daily life became more difficult as the war continued. Food shortages increased, cities were damaged, and many families lost loved ones. Propaganda continued to promise victory, but reality was becoming harder to ignore. The government demanded total commitment from the population. Men, women, and even young people were expected to contribute to the war effort. As conditions worsened, morale declined. In 1944, Allied forces launched major offensives from both the West and the East. German forces were gradually pushed back toward their own borders. By early 1945, Allied armies were advancing into Germany itself. Cities were surrounded, transportation systems collapsed, and communication broke down. The Nazi leadership became increasingly isolated from reality. As defeat became unavoidable, Hitler refused to accept responsibility or consider surrender. He continued to issue orders that could no longer be carried out. The government lost control, and the war effort collapsed. In May 1945, Germany officially surrendered. World War II in Europe came to an end. World War II caused enormous destruction and loss across Europe and beyond. Cities were damaged, economies were ruined, and millions of lives were affected. Germany was left divided and occupied by Allied powers. The war also led to major global changes, including new international organizations and efforts to prevent future conflicts. By April 1945, Adolf Hitler was living almost entirely underground in a reinforced bunker beneath Berlin. The city was surrounded, supplies were limited, and communication with the outside world was breaking down. Despite the situation, Hitler refused to leave the capital or accept that the war was lost. Inside the bunker, life followed a strange routine. Meetings continued, orders were given, and maps were studied, even though many of the units being discussed no longer existed. Hitler increasingly ignored reality and relied on hope rather than facts. Those around him noticed that his physical and mental health had clearly declined. During these final weeks, Hitler became more isolated and distrustful. He blamed military leaders for failures and accused others of betrayal. At the same time, he continued to believe that history would one day judge him favorably. He rejected all suggestions of surrender or negotiation. For Hitler, surrender was worse than death. He believed that Germany's collapse meant his own life had no further purpose. On April 29, 1945, Hitler married Eva Braun, his longtime companion, in a small private ceremony inside the bunker. This decision was symbolic rather than hopeful. It reflected his awareness that the end was near. That same day, Hitler dictated his final political statement and personal will. In these documents, he repeated his beliefs, assigned blame, and named successors. Although these plans had little real effect due to the situation outside. On April 30th, 1945, Adolf Hitler died by suicide in the bunker. Eva Braun died with him. Their deaths were kept secret from the public for a short time to prevent panic and disorder. Following Hitler's instructions, aides attempted to destroy the bodies to prevent them from being displayed or used for propaganda. Soon after, Soviet forces entered the area. After Hitler's death, any remaining central leadership quickly collapsed. There was no longer a single authority holding the system together. Within days, Germany officially surrendered, ending the war in Europe. News of Hitler's death spread rapidly. For some, it brought relief. For others, confusion and shock. For the wider world, it marked the final end of Nazi leadership. Hitler's death did not erase the consequences of his actions. Europe was left deeply damaged, millions of lives were lost, and entire communities had been destroyed. The impact of his rule continued long after the war ended. His final days illustrate how absolute power, when disconnected from reality, can lead to complete collapse. They also show how refusal to accept responsibility can worsen suffering rather than prevent it. This final chapter is important because it shows how the story ends, not with victory or justification, but with isolation, defeat, and ruin. It reminds learners that destructive leadership ultimately leads to loss for nations, for people, and for history itself.